Every time I hear the phrase "say his name," I really hear "say my name." And then the image of Allison Hannigan from American Pie flashes in my mind, and it just makes me laugh. Candyman isn't a laughing movie, though. It had been delayed, but it's finally out. Should you make the trip to the theater to see it? The Candyman, a murderous soul with a hook for a hand, is summoned to reality by an artist looking for inspiration for his new painting series. So it's been forever since I watched the original Candyman, and I've never seen the sequel. This felt like it is a sort of a sequel to the original, almost ignoring the actual sequel. Yaya Abdul-Mateen II stars as Anthony. He's a painter who's looking for new inspiration for his art. He wanders around the housing projects of Chicago's Cabrini Green neighborhood that are now abandoned, but they had been terrorized by a word-of-mouth ghost story that had summoned the Candyman just by saying his name 5 times while looking in the mirror. I really enjoyed Abdul-Mateen's performance as Anthony. He's inquisitive and at times mysterious, but he's also charismatic and fun. He's a complex character who has flaws and deficits, but also has some real bright spots which all then work together to create a relatable character. Teyonah Parris as Anthony's partner Brianna is also a complex character. She brings her own baggage to the relationship, and I really like how her past plays into so many aspects of her current life. She's experienced tragedy, which then guides her, but in ways that she probably doesn't even realize. I liked her dynamic with Anthony and that they had a level of realism to them where they got along, but they also don't see eye to eye on everything. The frustrations within the relationship bubble up and they feel natural. I also like some of the conversations that she has with others in the art world. There's a level of usury that happens and we get to see how vampiric some interactions are. Now, I loved the addition of Colman Domingo to the cast. First, his voice is so deep and soothing that I could just listen to him talk about whatever for hours. I really enjoyed how he is a narrator of sorts during portions to fill Anthony and then us as the audience in on past events. So even if you've never seen the original Candyman, Domingo's character William Burke recounts all of the lore of the infamous spirit and then catches us up in a way that doesn't feel forced or out of place. And that's something else I really liked. We get a ton of backstory and development on who the Candyman was. Even though it's told in a quick manner, there is so much detail that is given to make the man a real person. That then makes the story overall more impactful, especially as everything plays out towards the climax. While this is classified as a horror, I didn't find it frightening. Now, there are elements that are very real, so in that they are horrifying, but as far as terror went, I was never scared. And I know that is because I've never had to experience what the Black community has. So while I can empathize, I don't know what it's actually like to live through terrifying and unjust moments described in the movie. There is some gore that's shown, which is executed well, and I also appreciate that not all of the violence is shown on screen. Some is left to our imagination as to what is occurring. We just see the aftermath or the effects, like, we can see a large amount of blood pouring over a counter, but we don't see the actual killing that caused all of that blood. When the scenes leave some of it up to our imagination, it can actually cause what we imagine to be even worse than what they could have shown. The camera work and special effects are done really well. As part of the story, to summon the Candyman, someone has to be looking at their reflection while saying his name 5 times. This allows the camera to play with mirrors a lot. Sometimes we won't see anything in our regular field of view, but we will see glimpses in a reflection of a mirror. And the presence of bees also announces the arrival of the Candyman. So it's a really great effect as we'll see bees appear, but they're only on the reverse side of a mirror. And there's even a scene where we watch a bee transition from one side of the mirror to the other, and I thought that effect was done really well and it looked convincing. A lot of the cinematography was also executed in a really beautiful way. This takes place in Chicago, and they use the fog and tall buildings to craft some unsettling and then discombobulating views. There are also some scenes that take place in the abandoned projects, and they create a lonely and sad atmosphere, which then feeds into the story. There's also the use of these flat silhouette puppet-like things to illustrate Candyman's history, and I thought that was a great effect. Now, at first, I was afraid that it was going to break me out of the feel that the movie had, but it actually fits perfectly with that story because it's an art form, and our main protagonist, Anthony, is an artist. I love all the little nods to Clive Barker, whose story The Forbidden was the inspiration for the original Candyman film. Just to name a couple, there is a character named Clive at the beginning of the movie, and then Colman Domingo's character is reading a Clive Barker novel during a scene. It's just those little nods that I appreciate because it shows how carefully this story was crafted to tie into the original. And that's also what I really appreciate about the story, that this feels connected to the original movie and fits right into the universe that had been created. The ties are strong and they continue with a modernized narrative that is relevant for today. But this is also able to stand on its own. It doesn't rely on the audience having seen the original to get into this one. The movie is only 91 minutes long, so it's a quick watch. But with that, some of the climax felt a little rushed, especially with one particular character. Now, their motivations make complete sense, and I see how they arrived at the place they did, but the story progression itself felt like it came on too quickly, making it lose a bit of the storytelling pace that had already been established. There's also a physical progression with Anthony that I liked seeing, but some of it wasn't fully explained. The practical effects and the makeup looked just wonderful. But the reasoning as to what was going on, I felt really could have used some more detail. I mean, I assume I know what was happening, but a little bit of confirmation really would have been appreciated more. I enjoyed the social commentary, but I do think that there were points that it was a little heavy-handed. I know that the points were obvious, but I also know that the movie needed to say it louder for the cheap seats because there is quite often the segment that just doesn't get or doesn't understand subtlety, and these messages are just way too important to miss. The very ending of the movie was a culmination that was horrifyingly real, sickening, and obvious. Now, the obviousness was with Brianna's character actions, and they didn't bother me because it's exactly what I was rooting for. It's also a melancholy way for the story to wrap up, but I'm also glad that it didn't end on a huge upbeat moment because that would have felt cheap and even disingenuous to the story. So overall, I really enjoyed the storytelling, acting, and world building for this new iteration of Candyman. I loved the ties to the original, but also how this has a life of its own. The development and backstory that was given for the Candyman not only made him real, but also an effective and even sympathetic entity. The cinematography was executed really well, crafting visuals that were visceral and imagery that created a sense of loneliness and isolation. While I think the commentary was a little obvious, I do believe that the messages are relevant and needed. I was drawn to Yaya Abdul-Mateen's performance, as well as the rest of the cast, for what they bring to the screen. There's no sex or nudity, but a lot of profanity and a ton of violence. I give Candyman 4 out of 5 couches. Have you been looking forward to checking this one out? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie once you've seen it. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.